Stop. I'll buy those 3 Amish women. Without them, I'd be dead. A ragged mountain man, half frozen from the storm, shouts those words in the middle of a dusty auction yard. The gavel pauses. The crowd gasps. 3 plain-dressed sisters stand trembling, moments away from being sold like cattle. But saving them is only the beginning. Because their family's land hides a secret the railroad will kill to own. Corrupt papers, cold-eyed men in bowler hats, a sheriff with keys he wishes he didn't carry, and a town forced to choose between justice or silence. Lanterns flicker in the church, jail doors slam, hooves thunder down frozen roads. Faith, greed, and mercy collide on the edge of the Colorado mountains. He owes them his life. They need his strength. But when the law turns against them and the snow closes in, will this broken man and 3 orphaned women find a family worth fighting for, or be crushed beneath the iron wheels of the railroad? Drop a comment below and share which part of the world you're tuning in from today. If you enjoy stories like this, don't forget to subscribe for more. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the muddy streets of Silver Creek as Darren McGraw stumbled into town. His boots, worn from countless mountain trails, barely lifted from the muck with each exhausted step. Frost crystallized in his dark beard, and his horse Thunder limped beside him, both of them bearing the marks of their desperate journey through the spring blizzard. The smell of wood smoke and coal dust filled the air, mingling with the sharp ring of hammer on anvil from the blacksmith's shop. But it was the crowd's voices that drew Darren's attention. Cruel laughter and jeering calls echoing from the auction yard. His stomach growled fiercely, reminding him of the 3 days since his last real meal. The trap lines had been empty, game scared away by the unseasonable storm. Even Thunder's ribs showed through his winter coat. Darren leaned heavily on his rifle, using it like a walking stick as he made his way toward the commotion. The auction yard was packed with townspeople, pressed shoulder to shoulder around a crude wooden platform. Darren's eyes widened as he saw what had drawn such attention. 3 young women in plain dark dresses and white caps, standing close together like frightened deer. Their heads were bowed, but dignity showed in their straight backs and clasped hands. "Next up for indenture!" the auctioneer bellowed, his voice carrying across the yard. 3 fine Amish girls, fresh from Pennsylvania. Their pa's debts need settling, folks. Who'll start the bidding? He circled the sisters like a hungry wolf, pointing out their features. Strong backs, skilled hands. Why, they can cook, clean, and tend your children. Darren's grip tightened on his rifle as he recognized them. The eldest sister's face was etched in his memory. Hannah, the one who'd first spotted him that terrible day last winter when he'd fallen through river ice. She and her sisters had formed a human chain, pulling him to safety when any sensible folk would have left a stranger to freeze. "Look at these quaint outfits," the auctioneer tugged at Hannah's sleeve, drawing harsh laughs from the crowd. "Real authentic plain folk, right here in Colorado territory." The youngest sister, Chloe, he remembered, jerked away from the man's touch, her eyes flashing. The middle sister, Lydia, whispered something that seemed to calm her, though Darren could see tears threatening to spill from beneath her bonnet. A wave of anger burned through his exhaustion. These women had saved his life without hesitation, asking nothing in return. Now they stood exposed to public mockery, about to be sold into servitude to pay their dead father's debts. $10, someone shouted, and 15. 20 for the lot. The bids grew more raucous, peppered with crude suggestions about separating the sisters. Hannah's face had gone pale, but she kept her chin lifted, murmuring prayers that Darren could barely hear above the crowd's noise. "Stop!" Darren's voice boomed across the yard, silencing the bidders. He shouldered his way through the press of bodies, ignoring the mutters and sideways looks at his wild appearance. His boots thumped heavily on the platform steps as he climbed up beside the sisters. "I'll buy those 3 Amish women," he declared, meeting Hannah's startled gaze. "Without them, I'd be dead in the Sweetwater River." The crowd erupted in whispers. The auctioneer's smile faltered. "Now see here, mountain man, these are legal proceedings. You got cash to back up that claim?" Darren reached inside his buckskin coat, withdrawing a folded paper. "I've got the deed to my trapper's cabin, 10 acres with good water rights." His hands shook slightly as he unfolded it. but his voice remained steady. "And a wagon of prime beaver pelts, fresh from my winter lines, worth more than any cash bid you'll hear today." The auctioneer's eyes widened at the sight of the official seal on the deed. He beckoned the town clerk forward, who examined the document with careful attention. "It's genuine," the clerk announced, "registered 2 years ago with the territorial office." A murmur ran through the crowd. Everyone knew beaver pelts were as good as gold in Denver. The auctioneer looked from the deed to the sisters, then back to Darren's weathered face. "The debt stands at $48.16, he said slowly. "Your offer would more than cover it." "Then we have a deal." Darren's tone left no room for argument. He turned to Hannah, speaking more softly. "If you'll accept my help?" Hannah studied him for a long moment, recognition dawning in her eyes. "We remember thee," she said quietly. God's hand was surely in this meeting. The auctioneer cleared his throat. "Well then, if there are no other bids." He paused, but the crowd had grown subdued, perhaps shamed by their earlier behavior. "Sold. To the mountain man." The sisters gathered their few belongings, 3 small bundles wrapped in quilts, while Darren completed the paperwork. His signature was rough but legal. The deed transferred, the pelts counted, and suddenly he found himself responsible for 3 young Amish women in a town that had nearly sold them into bondage. "My cabin's not far," he told them as they led Thunder away from the auction yard. "It's small, but solid. You'll be safe there." The sun was setting by the time they reached the crude log structure, nestled in a grove of aspens just outside town. Snow had begun falling again, fat flakes drifting down in the gathering dusk. Inside, Darren quickly kindled a fire in the stone hearth while the sisters took stock of their surroundings. The cabin was spare but clean. One room with a plank floor, a few pieces of handmade furniture, and supplies stored in neat rows along the walls. Hannah immediately began preparing a meal from Darren's meager stores, while Lydia tended to Thunder's weather-stressed legs, and Chloe gathered more firewood from the stack by the door. They sat in silence around the rough-hewn table, sharing bowls of thin stew made from dried venison and the last of Darren's beans. The fire popped and crackled, casting dancing shadows on the log walls. Outside, the wind whispered through pine boughs heavy with snow. Darren watched the sisters from beneath his brows as they ate. Hannah's quiet grace, Lydia's gentle movements, Chloe's barely contained energy. They seemed both out of place and oddly right in his bachelor cabin. He had lived alone so long the silence had become a companion. Now it felt different, filled with unspoken questions. "We thank thee," Hannah said finally, her voice soft but clear, "for remembering thy debt and for showing such kindness to strangers." "Strangers?" Darren shook his head. "You stopped being strangers the day you pulled me from that river. I never thought I'd get the chance to repay that debt." "We did only what the Lord required," Lydia murmured, but her eyes were kind as she looked at their rough benefactor. "Still," Darren insisted, "a debt is a debt, and now you're free women, not indentured servants. Whatever happens next is your choice." Chloe spoke up for the first time since leaving town. "What exactly did happen to thee in that river?" Hannah never told the whole story. "Hush, sister," Hannah chided gently, but Darren let out a quiet chuckle. "I was crossing the ice, foolish and in a hurry. Should have known better. Spring thaws make for treacherous going. The ice gave way, and the current pulled me under." He paused, remembering the terrible cold. "I thought that was the end. And I heard voices, saw hands reaching down. Your sisters formed a chain, anchored by you." He nodded to Hannah. "Pulled me out like I was a drowned sheep." "We heard thy shouts," Hannah explained. "We were gathering firewood near the river." "Providence," Lydia said softly, and they all fell silent again, watching the fire's glow. Snow continued falling outside the cabin's single window, but inside, the warmth of the hearth and shared meal had begun to thaw more than just frozen bodies. As the evening deepened, each person lost in their own thoughts, the silence that settled over them was no longer the emptiness of loneliness, but the quiet of new possibilities taking root. Dawn crept through the cabin's single window, painting pale stripes across the rough-hewn floor. Hannah Yoder stirred first, her breath misting in the cold morning air. The fire had died to embers during the night, leaving a bitter chill in the one-room shack. She pulled her shawl tighter, surveying their new shelter in the early light. Darren McGraw had given them his bed, insisting on sleeping near the hearth. Now he lay wrapped in his bearskin, chest rising and falling steadily. Her sisters shared the narrow mattress. Lydia curled protectively around young Chloe. Their bonnets slipped askew during sleep. The cabin's sparse furnishings stood in stark contrast to their former home. A wooden table with 3 mismatched chairs, shelves laden with hunting supplies, cooking pots hung from pegs, and dried herbs dangled from the rafters. Everything spoke of a solitary life making do with whatever came to hand. Hannah moved quietly to the fireplace, adding kindling and small logs until flames sparked to life. She found the coffee pot and filled it with water from the bucket by the door. The familiar routine steadied her hands, though her heart still ached with all they'd lost. "Let me help with that." Lydia's soft voice made her turn. Her sister was already folding the quilts they'd used, her movements careful in the dim light. "Thy hands are like ice," Lydia whispered, touching Hannah's wrist. She reached for her medicine pouch, one of the few possessions they'd managed to keep. The Englishman's fingers look worse, though. Frostbite has set in. As if summoned by their voices, Darren stirred. He sat up slowly, wincing as he flexed his damaged hands. "Been through worse," he muttered, though his face was drawn with pain. "Nonsense," Lydia said firmly. "Let me see them properly now there's light." She knelt beside him, gentle fingers examining the swollen joints and blackened tips. From her pouch came dried yarrow and comfrey, crushed and mixed with snow to make a poultice. "This will help draw out the cold," she explained, wrapping his hands in clean cloth. "Much obliged," Darren said gruffly. "Ain't used to such fussing." "That much is plain to see," Chloe chimed in, finally awake and watching from the bed. Her eyes sparkled with mischief despite their circumstances. "Does thee always talk so rough? Or is it just for show?" "Chloe," Hannah scolded, but Darren's laugh was unexpected and real. "Reckon I do talk rough," he admitted. "Years alone in the mountains don't improve a man's manners none." "Or his cooking," Chloe added, eyeing the meager breakfast supplies. "Though I suppose thee had other things on thy mind last night, buying 3 strange women at auction." A shadow crossed Darren's face, and not strange to me. Not since that night by the river. He looked at Hannah, his expression serious. "Been meaning to thank you proper-like, for what you did then." Hannah busied herself with the coffee pot, uncomfortable with praise. "We did only what was right." "Tell us what happened," Chloe pressed, ignoring Hannah's warning look. "I was too young to go to the river that day." Darren's voice grew distant, remembering. "Was trying to cross the Sweetwater before spring thaw made it impossible. Ice looked solid enough, but—" he shook his head. "Went through like it was paper. Current dragged me under, and the cold. It steals your breath, your thoughts. Everything goes dark." "We heard the crack of ice," Hannah said softly, "then thy shouts." "I remember hands reaching down," Darren continued. 3 sets of scarves knotted together, lowered into the water. Don't know how you managed to pull me up." "Hannah anchored the chain," Lydia explained, still tending his frostbitten fingers. "I held her waist, and Sarah, our cousin who was visiting, grabbed my skirts. We wouldn't let go until we had thee safe." "Used your own scarves to bind my frozen hands after," Darren recalled. "Never did get to return them." A comfortable silence fell as Hannah poured the coffee. Even Chloe seemed subdued, perhaps sensing the weight of memory in the room. Finally, Hannah spoke again, her voice heavy with fresh grief. "We lost the farm 2 months ago," she said, "after Dat died. The bank claimed he had borrowed against the land." "We didn't know," Lydia added quietly. "He never told us how bad things had grown." "The drought last summer ruined most crops," Hannah continued. "Then winter came early. We tried to keep up with payments, but—" "Ain't right," Darren growled, "taking your land, trying to indenture you like that?" "We had nowhere else to go," Chloe said, anger flashing in her young face. "The English courts wouldn't listen. Said we had no rights without a male relative to speak for us." "You do now," Darren said firmly. "I swore to protect you, and I mean to keep that vow." Before anyone could respond, a sharp knock echoed through the cabin. They all turned to stare at the door, suddenly aware of how irregular their situation must seem to the outside world. Darren rose, moving protectively between the sisters and the entrance. "Who's there?" "Marcus Whitaker," came the reply, "from the bank. Need to speak with you, McGraw." Hannah recognized the banker's voice. He'd been present at their father's funeral, all false sympathy and hidden papers. She watched Darren open the door, letting in a blast of cold air along with the portly banker. Whitaker's eyes darted around the cabin, taking in the sisters' presence with poorly concealed disapproval. "Quite the talk in town," he said, clutching a leather portfolio. "Trading your cabin and an entire season's pelts for 3 Amish girls. People are wondering if you've gone mad." "My business is my own," Darren replied flatly. "State your purpose." The banker pulled out several documents, spreading them on the table. "There's something you should know about the Yoder property. It sits right where the railroad plans to lay their new spur line." Hannah felt her sisters draw closer, all of them watching as Whitaker pointed to a crude map. "Foreclosure papers are already in motion," he continued. "Victor Harlan, the railroad's agent, has been quite insistent about acquiring that particular stretch of land." "Insistent how?" Darren's voice had grown dangerous. "Let's just say he has ways of making things happen." Whitaker shifted uncomfortably. "The man lacks scruples, McGraw. And he's got money behind him. Railroad money." "So you came to warn us?" Hannah asked, studying the banker's face. "I came because," he hesitated, "because what happened to your father wasn't right. The loan documents, the timing of it all. Something doesn't add up. But Harlan's got friends in high places. Be careful. All of you." After Whitaker left, a heavy silence filled the cabin. Hannah moved to clear away the breakfast dishes, her mind churning with this new threat. She'd thought their troubles might ease after Darren's intervention at the auction. Now it seemed they'd stumbled into an even larger fight. The day passed in a blur of small tasks, cleaning, organizing, taking stock of supplies. As evening approached, Hannah lit the oil lamp and set out a simple supper of bread and dried meat. The familiar routine of breaking bread together brought some comfort, though worry lined every face at the table. When the meal was done, Hannah and her sisters knelt together as they had every evening of their lives. Their prayers rose in the gathering darkness, for guidance, for protection, for wisdom to face whatever challenges lay ahead. Darren sat apart in his chair by the fire, watching. His expression was troubled, but something else flickered there too, a hint of wonder perhaps at their unwavering faith. The lamplight caught his weathered features as he absently touched the poultice on his hands that had once been warmed by their scarves on a frozen riverbank. Outside, snow began falling again, dusting the window with white. Inside, 4 people whose lives had been suddenly tangled together sat in contemplation, each sensing that tomorrow would bring new battles, new choices, new tests of courage and faith. Dawn broke crisp and clear over the Colorado mountains. Frost painted delicate patterns on the cabin's single window, catching the early light like scattered diamonds. Inside, Darren McGraw worked at hitching his old mule to a weathered wagon, his movements stiff from the previous night's cold. Hannah watched from the doorway, a shawl pulled tight around her shoulders. "Are you certain about this?" she asked, noting how he favored his frost-damaged hands. "Sheriff needs to hear your case proper," Darren replied, adjusting the worn leather harness. "Man's gotta have some sense of right and wrong left in him." The wagon creaked as the sisters climbed aboard, their plain dresses and bonnets stark against the rough wooden boards. Chloe had insisted on bringing a basket of fresh-baked bread, saying they might trade it for supplies they sorely needed. The road into town wound between snow-dusted pines, the mule's hooves crunching through patches of ice. Darren sat straight on the driver's seat, his rifle across his knees. Every so often, his gaze would drift to Hannah beside him, watching how she held herself with quiet dignity despite their circumstances. The sheriff's office squatted at the end of the main street, its weather-beaten sign swinging in the mountain breeze. Tom Callahan looked up from his desk as they entered, his lined face registering surprise at the unusual group. "McGraw?" He nodded, then turned to the sisters. "Ladies, what brings you here?" Hannah stepped forward, her voice steady. "We've come about our father's farm, Sheriff. The foreclosure papers. We believe there may be irregularities." "Irregularities?" Callahan shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "Everything seemed in order when I reviewed them." "Did you look close?" Darren asked, his tone sharp. "Or just sign where the railroad man pointed?" The sheriff's face reddened. "Now see here, McGraw." "Please," Hannah interrupted, laying a gentle hand on Darren's arm. "We mean no disrespect. We only ask for fair consideration of our case." Callahan's expression softened slightly as he looked at the three sisters. "Truth is, there's not much I can do. Foreclosure papers are already filed with the court. Railroads got their legal rights." "Legal ain't always right," Darren growled. "The Lord will provide justice in his own time," Hannah said firmly, though her eyes showed her disappointment. "Thank you for hearing us, Sheriff." Outside on the boardwalk, their small group drew curious stares. A pair of well-dressed ladies whispered behind their fans, eyes wide at the sight of a rough mountain man escorting three Amish women. A group of cowboys lounging outside the saloon made no effort to hide their amusement. "Looks like McGraw's started himself a collection," one called out with a laugh. Darren's shoulders tensed, but Chloe was already marching toward the general store, her head held high. "Coming?" she called back to her sisters. "These fine folk clearly have nothing better to do than gawk." Inside the store, Chloe approached the counter with her basket of bread. The shopkeeper's wife brightened at the sight. "Is that your baking?" "We've missed it since you ladies left the farm." "Would you trade for flour?" Chloe asked. "We need to keep our hands busy even in reduced circumstances." The woman quickly agreed, praising the bread's perfect crust as she measured out flour. Lydia, meanwhile, examined the store's collection of dried herbs, selecting what she needed for her healing work. "The yarrow's fresh-dried," the shopkeeper offered. "Came in last week from back east." Lydia nodded her thanks, adding it to her small pile of purchases. Her gentle presence seemed to ease the awkwardness in the store, drawing friendly comments from other customers who had previously kept their distance. The sun was westering when they finally turned the wagon toward home. Hannah had been quiet since leaving the sheriff's office, her thoughts clearly troubled, despite her words about divine justice. Darren found himself wanting to offer comfort, but lacking the words. As they rounded the last bend before the cabin, he pulled the mule up short. A sleek black horse stood tied outside, and a man in a fine bowler hat waited on their front step. "Ah, the happy household returns," Victor Harlan called out, his smile never reaching his eyes. "I thought it time we had a chat about your situation." Darren stepped down from the wagon, positioning himself between the sisters and the railroad agent. "Nothing to chat about. This is my property." "For now," Harlan agreed smoothly. "But surely you've heard about the railroad's plans? Progress is coming to this valley, McGraw. Best not to stand in its way." "Is that a threat?" Darren's voice had gone dangerously quiet. "Simply a friendly warning. The law will side with the railroad in the end. It always does. Why put these lovely ladies through more upheaval?" Harlan glanced at the sisters, his expression calculating. "Better to accept the inevitable gracefully." "You'll not drive them off while I draw breath," Darren said, each word clear and hard as mountain ice. Harlan's smile tightened. "As you wish. But remember, I tried to be reasonable." He mounted his horse with practiced ease, touching the brim of his hat in mock courtesy. "Ladies, McGraw, do give my offer some thought." They watched him ride away, the setting sun casting long shadows across the snow. Hannah's hand found Darren's arm again, steadying him as much as herself. "Come," she said softly. "The day's not done and we need to tend those hands of yours." Inside, Chloe set about making cornbread with their traded flour while Hannah lit the lantern. Its warm glow pushed back the gathering darkness, making the cabin feel almost cozy, despite the tension lingering from Harlan's visit. Lydia prepared fresh poultices for Darren's frost-damaged fingers, which had grown worse during their day in town. He tried to wave her off, but she fixed him with a stern look that would have done her mother proud. "The Lord gave me healing skills for a reason," she said firmly. "Now sit still and let me work." Darren subsided, watching as she carefully unwrapped the previous day's bandages. Her touch was gentle but sure as she applied the new poultice, her quiet prayers mixing with the familiar sounds of dinner preparation. The cornbread's rich aroma soon filled the cabin. They ate by lantern light, the golden glow softening their tired faces. None mentioned Harlan's threats directly, but they all felt the weight of them hanging in the air like storm clouds gathering over the mountains. Yet there was comfort too, in the simple sharing of bread and the knowledge that they faced these troubles together. Darren found himself studying Hannah's profile in the lamplight, marveling at how she maintained such grace under pressure. When she caught his gaze and offered a small smile, something warm stirred in his chest that had nothing to do with the cornbread. Lydia insisted on checking his hands one final time before they settled for the night. "The swelling's worse," she murmured, applying more of her herbal remedy. "You must be careful not to strain them." "Can't afford to coddle myself," he started to object, but she shook her head. "You can't afford not to heal properly," she corrected. "We need you strong, Darren McGraw. All of us." The simple truth of her words silenced his protests. He submitted to her ministrations, watching as she wrapped clean bandages around his fingers with the same care she might show a wounded bird or sick child. The lantern burned low as night settled fully over the cabin. Outside, an owl called into the darkness, its lonely voice echoing off the mountains that stood like silent guardians against the star-filled sky. Dawn crept over the mountains, bringing with it a bitter wind that whistled through the gaps in Darren's cabin walls. Hannah stirred first, as was her way, moving quietly so as not to wake her sisters who still slept huddled under borrowed quilts. She stoked the dying embers in the fireplace, coaxing them back to life with practiced hands. Darren was already awake, sitting at his rough-hewn table and trying to flex his bandaged fingers. He looked up as Hannah moved about the small space, her quiet efficiency a stark contrast to his bachelor ways. "I should make breakfast," he offered, but Hannah shook her head with a gentle smile. "Let me show you something instead," she said, reaching for the flour sack they'd traded for yesterday. "Have you ever made biscuits?" Darren's bewildered expression was answer enough. Hannah pulled out a dented mixing bowl and began measuring flour with her palm. "Watch closely. My father always said breaking bread together makes a house feel more like home." "Your father sounds like a wise man," Darren said softly. He was. Hannah's hands stilled for a moment. Every morning, rain or shine, he would gather us around the table and read from the good book before breakfast. By now, Lydia and Chloe had risen too, drawn by the familiar sounds and smells of morning cooking. They gathered around the table, watching as Hannah guided Darren's injured hands through the motions of mixing flour, salt, and water. Papa had such a strong voice, Lydia remembered, her eyes distant. Even when the wind howled outside, his words carried through the whole house. "Remember how he would stop sometimes," Chloe added, right in the middle of a verse and ask us what we thought it meant? She smiled at the memory. "He never just told us the answer. He wanted us to think it through ourselves." Darren listened quietly as the sisters shared their memories, his rough hands growing steadier as he worked the biscuit dough under Hannah's guidance. Something about their words, about their father's dedication to both faith and family, stirred something long dormant in his heart. The biscuits came out a bit lopsided but warm and filling. As they ate, Darren studied the cabin with new eyes. "Place needs work," he admitted. "Never bothered much before, but now." "We can help," Chloe offered immediately. "I'm good with a needle. Those curtains are practically falling apart." "And I know how to insulate against the cold," Lydia added. "Mama taught me about using moss to fill the gaps between logs." Hannah nodded approvingly. "The chimney needs attention too. The draft isn't right." And so their day took shape. Chloe gathered the tattered curtains, settling by the window with her sewing kit. Her quick fingers darted in and out of the fabric, mending tears and reinforcing weak spots. Lydia went outside to gather moss, showing surprising knowledge of which types would work best to block the wind. Darren, despite his injured hands, insisted on tackling the chimney. Hannah watched him with concern as he climbed onto the roof, but his movements were sure despite his bandaged fingers. The sound of his work mixed with Chloe's humming and Lydia's soft footsteps as she moved along the walls, creating an unexpectedly harmonious atmosphere. By midday, the cabin already felt different. Patched curtains hung straighter in the windows, the worst of the drafts had been sealed, and smoke rose properly from the chimney instead of backing into the room. More than the physical improvements, though, was the sense of purpose that had filled the space. The awkward tension of strangers forced together had begun to fade, replaced by something warmer. As the sun began to sink toward the mountains, they heard hoofbeats approaching. A wagon pulled up outside, driven by an elderly woman wearing a severe black dress and an even more severe expression. "Mrs. Abernathy." Hannah greeted her politely, stepping outside. The widow was known throughout the valley for her strong opinions and stronger tongue. "Girls," Mrs. Abernathy replied, her lips pressed thin as she took in their situation. Her eyes lingered particularly on Darren, who had just climbed down from the roof. "I felt it my Christian duty to check on you. This is hardly a proper arrangement." "We're managing well enough," Hannah assured her, but the older woman wasn't finished. "You don't know men like him," she continued, lowering her voice but not enough to prevent her words from carrying. "Wild men, mountain men. They're not fit company for decent women. You'd be better off returning east to your people." Before Hannah could respond diplomatically, Chloe burst out of the cabin, her eyes flashing. "Mr. McGraw saved us from being separated and sold off like cattle. Where was your Christian duty then, Mrs. Abernathy? Did you offer to help when they were auctioning us in the street?" "Chloe," Hannah warned, but her younger sister wasn't finished. "He gave up everything he owned to help us," Chloe continued hotly. "His cabin, his furs, everything. And he's never been anything but respectful. So you can take your judgments and—" "That's enough," Hannah cut in firmly, though there was a hint of pride in her eyes at Chloe's fierce defense. "Thank you for your concern, Mrs. Abernathy. We'll keep your advice in mind." The widow drew herself up stiffly. "On your own heads be it then," she declared, and turned her wagon around. After she'd gone, Darren's deep chuckle broke the tension. "That sister of yours," he said to Hannah, shaking his head in amazement. "She's got more fire in her than most men I've met in the mountains." Chloe lifted her chin. Someone had to speak up. "It's not right how they talk about you." "Been called worse," Darren shrugged, but there was warmth in his eyes as he looked at the youngest sister. "Still, it's been a long while since anyone stood up for me. Much obliged." As evening settled over the valley, they gathered once more around the fire. Lydia took up her mending again, her soft humming filling the cabin with the familiar notes of amazing grace. Hannah prepared a simple supper while Chloe told stories about their father's attempts to teach her to milk cows, making even Darren laugh with her animated descriptions. The mountain man sat quietly in his corner, watching the sisters move about what had so recently been his lonely cabin. When Hannah called them to supper, he found himself bowing his head automatically as the sisters prepared to pray. For the first time since he was a boy, words of gratitude rose unbidden in his heart. He didn't speak them aloud, but in the peaceful quiet of that moment, he felt something shift inside him, like a frozen stream beginning to thaw in spring. Lydia's hymn continued softly in the lamplight as they finished their meal, her gentle voice weaving through the shadows like a thread of gold. The day's work had left its mark, not just in the improved cabin, but in the way they moved around each other with growing ease, the way silence between them had become comfortable rather than strained. Looking at them now, Hannah's quiet strength, Lydia's nurturing spirit, Chloe's fierce loyalty, Darren felt the weight of his responsibility to them. But for the first time in years, responsibility didn't feel like a burden. Instead, it felt like something closer to purpose. Sunday dawned clear and cold, the morning sun casting long shadows across the snow-dusted valley. Inside Darren's cabin, an unusual flurry of activity marked the day. Hannah pressed their plain dresses with a heated iron, while Lydia helped Darren with his collar, tutting over his threadbare Sunday coat. "It ain't much," Darren apologized, fidgeting as Lydia smoothed the worn fabric. "Haven't had call to dress proper in years." "The Lord looks at the heart, not the coat," Hannah assured him, carefully folding her shawl. "We're grateful you're taking us to service." Chloe emerged from behind the curtain they'd hung for privacy, adjusting her white prayer cap. "Though I reckon the town will have plenty to say about it," she added with a knowing look. "Let them talk," Darren growled protectively. "You've as much right to worship as anyone." They loaded into Darren's wagon, now lined with fresh straw to ward off the morning chill. The sisters huddled together on the bench seat while Darren handled the reins. As they approached the small white church on the edge of town, they could see other wagons and riders converging on the building. Conversation stopped as Darren's wagon pulled up. Women in their Sunday finest paused on the church steps, fans and whispers moving in equal measure. Men stood in clusters, their expressions ranging from curiosity to outright disapproval. "There's McGraw," someone muttered. "With them Amish girls he bought." "Ain't natural them living out there with him," another voice carried clearly. Darren's jaw tightened, but Hannah laid a gentle hand on his arm. "Peace," she whispered. "We're here to worship, nothing more." They made their way up the wooden steps, Darren unconsciously positioning himself between the sisters and the staring crowd. At the door, Preacher Ward stood greeting his congregation. The elderly minister hesitated for just a moment when he saw them. Then his weathered face broke into a warm smile. "Welcome, welcome," he said, extending his hand first to Darren, then to each sister in turn. "Our house of worship is open to all God's children." Inside, they found seats near the back, though there was no hiding from the sideways glances and turned heads. The simple wooden pews creaked as people shifted to get a better look at the strange group. The mountain man sitting stiffly in his patched coat, the three Amish women in their plain dress and prayer caps. The service began with a familiar hymn, "Amazing Grace," the congregation joining in with well-practiced harmony. As the last notes faded, Preacher Ward stepped to his pulpit, his kind eyes scanning the gathered faces. "Today's scripture speaks of God's endless capacity to surprise us," he began, "of how his plans often confound our earthly expectations." The sermon that followed touched on acceptance, on seeing beyond surface judgments to the heart beneath. More than one person shifted uncomfortably, as the preacher's words seemed to address the morning's gossip. When it came time for the next hymn, Hannah whispered something to her sisters. They stood together, and in clear, pure voices began to sing an unfamiliar melody. The words were in German, an old Amish hymn passed down through generations. Their voices wove together in haunting harmony, Lydia's alto supporting Hannah's strong soprano while Chloe's sweet young voice soared above them both. The effect was immediate. The whispers ceased. Fans stopped mid-flutter. Even the restless children stilled, caught by the otherworldly beauty of the song. The hymn spoke of faith in trials, of God's guidance through dark valleys, of the peace that passes understanding. Darren sat transfixed, a strange tightness growing in his throat. The sisters' voices filled the small church with a grace that seemed to transcend the rough-hewn walls and simple furnishings. He had heard them sing before, of course, in quiet moments at the cabin, but this was different. This was a testimony of faith that needed no translation to be understood. As the last note faded into reverent silence, more than one eye in the congregation glistened with tears. Preacher Ward had to clear his throat twice before he could continue the service. When the final prayer was said and the congregation began to file out, something had shifted. Instead of hurrying past, several townspeople approached the sisters with genuine warmth. "That hymn was beautiful," Mrs. Miller, the baker's wife, said earnestly. "Would you teach it to our choir?" "My grandmother came from Pennsylvania Dutch country," another woman added. "Hearing you sing brought back such memories." Even Mrs. Abernathy, who had been so critical before, grudgingly admitted the song had touched her heart. As the crowd thinned, Preacher Ward made his way to where Darren stood watching the sisters interact with their newfound admirers. The old minister's handshake was firm, his smile genuine. "I see God's hand in this, Brother McGraw," he said quietly. "When you first brought them home, some questioned your motives, but I see something else entirely. An unlikely family being formed, each member bringing their own gifts, their own strength." Darren shifted uncomfortably, unused to such directness about matters of faith. "Just trying to repay a debt, preacher. They saved my life once. And perhaps they're saving it again," the minister suggested gently, "in a different way." With a knowing smile and a pat on Darren's shoulder, he moved on to bid farewell to other departing worshippers. The ride home was quiet, each lost in their own thoughts as the wagon creaked along the familiar trail. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the snow, and their breath fogged in the crisp air. Back at the cabin, Hannah set about preparing their Sunday dinner while Lydia and Chloe gathered firewood. As Darren built up the fire, Hannah paused in her work to speak softly to him. "Thank you for today," she said, "for standing with us, despite the talk. It couldn't have been easy." Darren studied the flames for a long moment before responding. "Been a long time since I had any family to stand with," he admitted gruffly. "Longer still since I set foot in a church. But hearing you three sing today, He trailed off, searching for words. Stirred something? Hannah suggested gently. He nodded. Something I thought was long buried. My ma used to sing hymns when I was just a boy. Had almost forgotten the feeling they gave me. The Lord works in mysterious ways, Hannah said, returning to her cooking with a small smile. Later, as they sat around the fire enjoying their simple meal, Chloe's irrepressible spirit bubbled up. Well, Mr. McGraw, she teased, between taking us to church and joining our prayers, we've nearly made you half Amish already. Darren's surprised laugh joined the sisters' merry voices, filling the cabin with warmth. They sat together long after the meal was done, sharing stories and memories as the fire burned low. The tensions and uncertainties of the past week seemed to ease, replaced by a growing sense of belonging. Outside, the winter wind whistled through the pines, but inside the cabin, for the first time since their ordeal began, true comfort had taken root. It wasn't just the physical improvements they'd made to the shelter, but something deeper. The beginning of healing. Of family formed not by blood, but by choice and circumstance, and perhaps, as Preacher Ward had suggested, by God's mysterious hand. The weak winter sun struggled to warm the frosted ground as Darren and Hannah stood examining the patch of earth near the shack. His mule stamped restlessly, breath steaming in the cold morning air. The ground was hard, but not completely frozen, just workable enough to start clearing. If we can break up this soil now, Hannah said, gesturing to the rough patch, it'll be ready for planting come spring. Her practical knowledge of farming showed in every word, though her eyes held a hint of uncertainty about making such long-term plans. Darren adjusted the mule's harness, his movements careful due to his still healing hands. Reckon you're right. Might not be much, but it'll give us something to work with. He paused, noting how naturally the word us had slipped out. They worked through the morning, the mule straining against roots and stones while Hannah and Darren guided the plow. The work was slow, but steady. Each pass revealed dark earth beneath the frost-killed grass, promising future growth. Near noon, Chloe emerged from the cabin, her sleeves already rolled up. I can help with the wood cutting, she announced, reaching for the axe that leaned against the shed. Darren frowned. That's man's work, girl. Chloe's chin lifted defiantly. I helped Dad, Father, every winter. I'm stronger than I look. Without waiting for permission, she positioned a log and swung the axe. The blade bit deep, and with several more solid strikes the wood split cleanly. Hannah smiled at Darren's surprised expression. Our Chloe has always been blessed with more strength than seems fitting for her size. Throughout the afternoon, the youngest sister proved her worth, steadily adding to the woodpile while Darren and Hannah continued their ground clearing. Her determined swings matched the rhythm of their plowing, creating a strange harmony of honest work. Inside the cabin, Lydia had laid out her healing supplies, clean cloths, herbal poultices, and salves she'd carefully prepared. When Darren finally came in for his daily treatment, she clicked her tongue at the sight of his reddened, cracked hands. You pushed too hard, she scolded gently, examining his frostbite damage. The body needs time to heal. Darren shifted uncomfortably as she applied her medicines. Can't afford to rest. Too much needs doing. And what good will you be to anyone if you cripple yourself? Lydia's voice was soft but firm as she wrapped fresh bandages around his fingers. The Lord gave us wisdom to know when to work and when to heal. That evening, as they gathered around the rough table for supper, the cabin felt different. Perhaps it was the honest tiredness in their muscles, or the way the day's shared work had worn away some of their awkwardness. Steam rose from bowls of Hannah's bean soup, and Chloe had managed to make cornbread that was only slightly burned on the bottom. Darren cleared his throat, pushing his empty bowl aside. Been thinking, he said slowly, eyes fixed on the table's scarred surface. If we're to stay here any length of time, this cabin ain't proper size for 4 people. He glanced up, meeting their surprised looks. Thought maybe we could build something larger, come spring. 2 rooms at least, give you women proper privacy. The sisters exchanged glances. It was the first time he'd spoken of any future beyond their immediate needs. Hannah's eyes met his, soft with something like hope, but shadowed with caution. She'd learned the hard way how Quickly, security could vanish. Before anyone could respond, hoofbeats approached outside. Darren was on his feet instantly, reaching for his rifle. Through the window, they saw several riders approaching in the fading light, the railroad agent's bowler hat visible at their head. "Stay inside," Darren ordered, stepping out to meet them. The agent, Victor Harlan, sat his horse with smug confidence, several rough-looking men flanking him. Without dismounting, he removed an official-looking document from his coat. "By order of the Territorial Court," he announced, his voice carrying clearly in the cold air, "notice is hereby given. The occupants of this property must vacate these premises within 10 days due to disputed land claims and pending railroad acquisition." He held out the paper. "I trust you'll comply peacefully, McGraw. Hate to see any unfortunate incidents." Darren snatched the notice, his face dark with rage. In one swift motion, he tore it in half, letting the pieces flutter to the snow. "Get off my land," he growled. The agent's smile never wavered. "The law's the law, McGraw." 10 days. He wheeled his horse, his men following as they rode away into the gathering dusk. Darren stood rigid, watching until they disappeared. His hands had curled into fists, reopening barely healed cracks. The urge to grab his rifle and follow them burned in his chest. Hannah's quiet voice behind him broke through his anger. "Violence will not solve this." "No." He turned to face her, voice rough. "Sometimes a man's got to fight." "And sometimes true courage lies in not fighting," she replied steadily. "That is what my father taught us." Darren stalked away, unable to stand still. The moon rose, cold and bright, casting sharp shadows across the snow as he paced. His breath came out in angry clouds, his thoughts churning between rage at the agent's threats and Hannah's words of peace. He didn't hear her approach until she spoke again. "When I was young," Hannah said softly, "my father faced men who wanted our land in Pennsylvania. They threatened him, tried to provoke him to fight." Darren stopped pacing but didn't turn. What did he do? He met their anger with kindness, their threats with prayer. She moved to stand beside him, both of them gazing at the moonlit landscape. "He taught us that courage guided by mercy is stronger than any weapon." "Your father was a better man than me," Darren said roughly. "I'm not worthy of such trust. My hands are stained with too much violence." Hannah was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was gentle but firm. "Worthiness is not yours to decide. God's mercy falls on all who seek it." She touched his arm lightly. "You traded everything you owned to save 3 strange women. That speaks of a heart capable of great good." Darren stood motionless, shaken by her words and the simple touch of her hand. The moonlight caught the fine lines of her face, the quiet strength in her eyes. For the first time in years, he felt the walls around his heart begin to crack. "I don't know how to fight without fighting," he admitted finally. "Then perhaps it is time to learn a new way," Hannah replied. "We will face this together, with faith and wisdom rather than fists and fury." They stood in companionable silence, watching their breath mingle in the cold air. The moon continued its arc across the sky, casting their shadows long across the snow. Behind them, light spilled from the cabin windows where Lydia and Chloe moved about their evening tasks. The scene held a strange peace despite the threat hanging over them. Eventually, Hannah spoke again. "We should go in. Tomorrow will bring its own challenges." Darren nodded but remained outside a moment longer after she left. His eyes traced the territory he had come to think of as home, the cleared patch of earth, the woodpile Chloe had helped build, the cabin that suddenly seemed full of life instead of lonely. For the first time, he began to understand that some battles might be won not with gunpowder and grit, but with patience and faith. Inside, the sisters were preparing for bed, their quiet movements familiar now after weeks together. Lydia had left fresh bandages for his hands on the table. Chloe was banking the fire for the night. Hannah stood by the window, her face thoughtful as she watched the moonlight paint silver patterns on the snow. The cabin felt small, cramped with 4 people, yet somehow more like home than it had in all the years Darren had lived there alone. His earlier words about building something larger echoed in his mind. Despite the agent's threats, or perhaps because of them, the idea of creating a real home, one big enough for all of them, took root more firmly in his heart. Dawn brought bitter cold and heavy clouds that promised more snow. Darren hitched his mule to the wagon while Hannah packed provisions for their journey to the county clerk's office. The rickety wagon creaked under their weight as they set out, breath visible in the frigid morning air. "It's a full day's ride to reach Cedar Junction," Darren said, clucking to the mule. "Hope we make it there and back before the weather turns worse." Hannah adjusted the woolen blanket across their laps, her plain dark dress and bonnet stark against the white landscape. She had packed bread, dried apples, and cheese for their journey, wrapped carefully in cloth. "The Lord will guide our path," she said softly. The wagon wheels crunched through crusty snow as they followed the winding road. Stands of pine and aspen lined their route, branches heavy with white. For the first hour, they rode in comfortable silence, each lost in thought about the challenges ahead. "Tell me more about your people," Darren said finally, glancing at Hannah. "I know little of the Amish way, except what I've seen in you and your sisters." Hannah's face softened at the mention of her faith. "We believe in living simply, following God's word. Our ways may seem strange to others, but they keep us close to what matters most: family, community, devotion to the Lord." "And the part about not fighting?" Darren asked carefully. "Even when threatened?" "Especially then," Hannah replied. "We believe that violence only breeds more violence. Jesus taught us to turn the other cheek, to meet hatred with love." She paused, studying his profile. "I know this is difficult for you to understand." Darren's hands tightened on the reins. "Been a fighter all my life. Had to be to survive in these mountains. But I reckon there's wisdom in your ways, even if they don't come natural to me." "You show more understanding than most," Hannah said quietly. "Many mock us for our beliefs without trying to learn why we hold them." The morning wore on as they talked. Hannah explained more about Amish traditions, their dedication to mutual aid, their rejection of pride and worldly ways, their trust in God's providence. Darren listened intently, asking thoughtful questions that surprised her with their depth. Around midday, they stopped to rest the mule and eat some of their provisions. Hannah spread the blanket on a fallen log, laying out bread and cheese. They ate in companionable silence, watching their breath steam in the cold air. "Your father," Darren said suddenly. "He must have been a good man to raise daughters with such strong faith." Hannah's eyes grew distant with memory. "He was. Everything we know about following God's path, we learned from him. Even when times were hardest, his faith never wavered." They resumed their journey as clouds gathered overhead. The wagon swayed and jolted over the rough road, forcing them to sit close together for balance. By mid-afternoon, they reached Cedar Junction, a larger town with actual brick buildings lining its main street. The county clerk's office occupied a narrow building wedged between the bank and the post office. Inside, the clerk, a thin man with wire-rimmed spectacles, regarded them with barely concealed disdain. "We've come about the foreclosure papers on the Yoder property," Darren stated firmly. The clerk shuffled through a stack of documents, finally pulling out a leather folder. "Everything appears to be in order," he said dismissively. "The bank has full legal right to proceed with foreclosure." "May we examine the papers?" Hannah asked politely. With obvious reluctance, the clerk laid out the documents. Hannah and Darren leaned close, studying the cramped handwriting. Something caught Hannah's eye. "These signatures," she said quietly to Darren, "they're dated 3 days after Father died. But the bank president was away in Denver that entire week. I remember because we couldn't meet with him about the loan." Darren's eyes narrowed. "And look here, the notary seal is smudged like it was added in haste." He looked up at the clerk. "These papers weren't filed proper." The clerk's face reddened. "The documents have been processed and recorded. Without direct orders from a judge, I cannot overturn them." "Even if they're fraudulent?" Darren demanded, his voice rising. "That's not for me to decide," the clerk said stiffly. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I have other work to attend to." Outside, snow had begun to fall in thick flakes. Darren helped Hannah into the wagon, his movements sharp with anger. "That clerk knows something's wrong with those papers," he muttered. "But someone's got him scared to speak up." They set out for home, but the storm intensified quickly. Wind drove the snow sideways, cutting visibility to mere yards. The mule plodded forward, head low against the weather. "We need to find shelter," Hannah called over the wind. "Night's coming and we'll freeze if we're caught out here." Through the swirling snow, Darren spotted the dark shape of a barn. He guided the mule toward it, praying it wasn't locked. To their relief, the door stood partially open, and warm animal smells drifted out. Inside, they found a well-maintained barn with several horses in stalls. A lantern hung from a beam, and a pile of clean hay filled one corner. "Who goes there?" a gruff voice called. A tall rancher emerged from the shadows holding another lantern. "Darren McGraw and Hannah Yoder," Darren answered. "Got caught in the storm. Would be much obliged if we could shelter here till it passes." The rancher, who introduced himself as Tom Bradley, proved friendly once he recognized them. "The Amish sisters everyone's talking about? Of course you can stay. Storm's likely to blow all night anyway." He helped them unhitch the mule and settle it with fresh hay, then invited them to share his simple supper of beans warmed over a small fire in the barn's corner stove. As they ate, Hannah told Bradley about their visit to the clerk's office and their suspicions about the foreclosure papers. The rancher nodded thoughtfully. "Railroad's been buying up land all through here," he said. "Some sales legitimate? Well, let's just say there's been talk of strong-arm tactics and forged documents. But nobody's willing to stand up to them." After Bradley retired to his house, Hannah and Darren settled into the hay pile, wrapped in their traveling blankets. The wind howled outside, rattling the barn's walls. "What if we can't stop them?" Hannah whispered into the darkness. "My sisters and we've already lost one home. I don't know if we can bear being cast adrift again." Darren reached out, finding her hand in the darkness, his calloused fingers wrapped around hers, warm and steady. "As long as I draw breath," he said firmly, "you'll have a home. I swear it." Hannah's fingers tightened around his. They sat in silence, listening to the storm rage outside while the horses shifted quietly in their stalls. Despite her fears, Hannah felt anchored by Darren's presence, his quiet strength offering comfort she hadn't expected to find. Morning brought clear skies and deep snow. After thanking Bradley for his hospitality, they set out for home. The sun sparkled blindingly off the fresh powder, and their breath frosted in the sharp air. Neither spoke much during the journey home, but the silence felt comfortable, filled with shared purpose and growing trust. Hannah found herself studying Darren's profile as he guided the mule, seeing past his rough exterior to the honorable heart beneath. His willingness to understand her faith, to respect ways so different from his own, touched her deeply. They were still several hours from home when Darren finally broke the silence. "Those papers may give us a way to fight back, legal-like, I mean, without violence." Hannah nodded, understanding his meaning. "A way that honors both justice and peace." "Reckon I'm learning there might be more than one kind of courage," Darren admitted. "More than one way to stand firm." The wagon creaked onward through the snow, carrying them home to face whatever challenges lay ahead. Though the threat of eviction still loomed, something had shifted between them during this journey. A deepening of trust, a sharing of strength that would prove vital in the days to come. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the snow when Hannah and Darren's wagon finally pulled up to the shack. Before they could even climb down, the door burst open. Chloe rushed out, her black bonnet askew, with Lydia following more sedately behind her. "You're back," Chloe exclaimed, helping Hannah down from the wagon. "We were starting to worry something had happened to you in the storm." "The storm forced us to shelter overnight in a kind rancher's barn," Hannah explained, embracing each of her sisters in turn. "But we're safe. Praise be to God." Darren began unhitching the tired mule while the sisters helped carry their traveling things inside. The shack felt wonderfully warm after the long journey, with a pot of soup bubbling on the stove and fresh-baked bread cooling on the rough wooden table. Once they had all settled around the fire with bowls of hot soup, Darren shared what they had discovered at the county clerk's office. His voice grew hard as he described the suspicious signatures and smudged notary seal. "Those sneaking lying," Chloe jumped up, her face flushed with anger. "They forged those papers. They're trying to steal our land through falsehood." "Chloe," Hannah cautioned, though her own eyes showed worry. "Remember what Father taught us about controlling our temper? But it's not right. Chloe paced the small room, her skirt swishing. They're counting on us being too weak or too scared to fight back. Lydia, who had been quietly listening, set aside her mending and folded her hands in prayer. Lord, we ask for your guidance in this time of trouble. Let justice prevail through your wisdom, not through our anger. Her soft words seemed to settle over the room like a blanket. Even Chloe's restless movement stilled as they all bowed their heads, letting the peace of prayer wash over them. The next morning, Darren rose before dawn. The threat of eviction weighed heavily on his mind as he hitched the mule to his sledge and headed into the forest. The sound of his axe rang through the trees as he chopped and gathered firewood, determined to stock enough to see them through if they were forced to leave. He worked through the morning, his breath frosting in the cold air. When he returned with the loaded sledge, he found Hannah and her sisters had been equally busy. The smell of fresh bread filled the shack, and several loaves cooled on the windowsill. We thought perhaps sharing bread with our neighbors might help them understand our situation better, Hannah explained, wrapping a still warm loaf in clean cloth. Kindness often opens doors that force cannot. Darren nodded, recognizing the wisdom in her approach. While he stockpiled supplies and reinforced the shack's walls, the sisters began visiting nearby homes with their bread and gentle words. Their genuine warmth and willingness to help others despite their own troubles gradually began to soften hearts in the community. Mrs. Abernathy, the stern widow who had initially been so suspicious, was among the first to change her mind. She arrived one afternoon with a basket of preserved vegetables and stayed to help Hannah patch some worn quilts. Other neighbors followed, some bringing small gifts of food or supplies, others simply offering companionship and support. One particularly cold evening, a knock at the door revealed Preacher Ward, his collar turned up against the wind. They welcomed him in, and Lydia quickly poured him a cup of hot coffee. "I've been hearing talk in town," the preacher said, warming his hands around the cup, "about the railroad's plans and about your family here." He looked around at them all, the 3 Amish sisters and the weathered mountain man who had become their protector. Some folks are starting to question whether progress should come at the cost of justice. "The railroad has powerful friends," Darren said grimly. "Money talks louder than conscience for many." Preacher Ward nodded solemnly. "Their influence runs deep, no doubt about that. But God's justice runs deeper still, and he often works through the hearts and hands of ordinary folks who choose to stand together." The preacher's words seemed to hang in the air, carrying both comfort and challenge. After he left, they sat around the table for their evening meal, a simple supper of beans and cornbread. The lantern cast a warm glow over their faces as they ate. "You know something?" Chloe said suddenly, setting down her spoon. "When they first auctioned us off, I felt so ashamed, like we were nothing but burdens to be passed around." She looked at Darren, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "But now I feel like we're family. Real family." Darren tried to speak, but emotion closed his throat. He could only nod, his heart too full for words. Here in this rough cabin, with these 3 sisters who had brought such unexpected warmth to his solitary life, he'd found something he hadn't even known he was missing. Hannah reached out and squeezed his hand, understanding in her eyes. "Shall we pray together?" she asked softly. They joined hands around the table, Darren's calloused fingers linked with Hannah's work-worn ones, Chloe's young strength clasping Lydia's gentle touch. Their voices rose together in the lantern light, a family bound not by blood, but by choice and faith and love. "Dear Lord," Hannah began, "we thank you for bringing us together. For giving us strength in hard times," Lydia added. "For showing us that family can grow in unexpected ways," Chloe contributed. Darren listened to their voices twining together, feeling the profound rightness of this moment. When it came his turn, he spoke from his heart. "And thank you for teaching this old mountain man that there's more to life than surviving alone." The lantern flickered, casting their shadows on the wall. 4 separate shapes merged into one, their prayers rising like smoke into the winter night. Outside, snow began to fall again. But inside the shack, warmth and hope bloomed like spring flowers through winter frost. They were no longer just 3 displaced sisters and a lonely trapper. They had become something more, a family forged in adversity, strengthened by faith, and bound together by love that grew stronger with each passing day. As they prepared for sleep that night, the sisters singing a soft hymn as they banked the fire, Darren felt a peace he hadn't known in years. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together, with the support of growing friendships in the community and the guidance of their shared faith. The lantern's glow dimmed, but the warmth in their hearts burned bright and steady, a flame that no railroad agent or unjust law could extinguish. Dawn broke cold and gray over the Colorado mountains. Hannah stood at the window of Darren's shack, watching frost patterns spread across the glass like delicate lace. Her heart felt as heavy as the clouds that hung low over the peaks. The deadline for their eviction had arrived. Lydia stirred the morning porridge without her usual gentle humming, while Chloe paced restlessly near the door. Darren sat at the rough-hewn table, cleaning his rifle with steady hands that betrayed none of the tension in his face. "You don't have to do this," Hannah said softly, turning from the window. "We could leave peacefully. Find another place." "No." Darren's voice was firm as he slid the cleaning rod through the rifle barrel. "I've watched too many good folks driven off their land by men who twist the law to serve greed. Not this time." The sound of approaching horses made them all freeze. Through the window, they could see a group of riders approaching, the railroad agent Victor Harlan in his fine black coat and bowler hat, flanked by 4 rough-looking men. Behind them rode Sheriff Tom Callahan, his shoulders slumped beneath his badge. "Stay inside," Darren ordered, rising from the table with his rifle in hand. He stepped out onto the porch, pulling the door closed behind him. But the sisters moved to the window, watching as Harlan dismounted and straightened his coat with precise movements. His voice carried clearly in the cold morning air. "Time's up, McGraw. These women have no legal right to be here, and neither do you. Clear out now and we'll let this pass without trouble." Darren stood his ground, rifle held ready but not aimed. "The only trouble here is the fraud you're trying to pass off as legal papers. Those signatures weren't proper, and you know it." "Careful, Trapper." Harlan's smile was cold as the frost. "Accusations of fraud are serious matters. Best mind your tongue." The sheriff dismounted slowly, his boots crunching in the snow. "Don't make this harder than it needs to be, Darren. I've got my orders." "Orders to enforce crooked claims?" Darren's voice rose with anger. "What happened to protecting the innocent, Tom? Or does that badge just mean following whatever the railroad wants?" Inside the shack, Hannah pressed her hand against the cold glass, watching the confrontation with growing fear. She could see the hired men spreading out, hands near their gun belts. "Last chance," Harlan called out. "Step aside and let us remove these women or face the consequences." Darren's only response was to lift his rifle to his shoulder, aiming at the space between Harlan and his men. "You'll not lay a hand on them while I draw breath." What happened next unfolded with terrible swiftness. 2 of Harlan's men rushed the porch from opposite sides while another fired a shot that splintered the wood near Darren's head. He swung his rifle toward the shooter, but the distraction was enough. The men crashed into him, driving him down onto the rough boards. The sisters burst through the door as Darren struggled against his attackers. Chloe screamed in rage, trying to reach him, but Lydia held her back. Hannah stepped forward, her voice rising above the chaos. "Stop this, we are peaceful people." One of the men shoved her roughly aside. She stumbled, catching herself against the porch rail as they dragged Darren down the steps. He fought hard, landing several solid blows, but they overwhelmed him with sheer numbers. The sound of fists striking flesh made Hannah's stomach turn. "That's enough," the sheriff's voice cracked like a whip. "Get him secured, but no more beating. This is exactly what we discussed, Sheriff," Harlan cut in smoothly. "The law must be enforced. Take him to jail for resisting eviction and threatening official agents." They hauled Darren to his feet, blood running from his nose and split lip. His eyes met Hannah's, full of fury and helpless apology. "Hannah!" "Don't let them." A punch to his stomach silenced him. As they dragged him toward the waiting horses, Chloe broke free from Lydia's grasp and ran forward. "You can't do this. He was protecting us. He dashed at—" "Young lady," Harlan's voice was silk over steel. "I suggest you and your sisters gather whatever belongings you can carry and clear this property immediately. Unless you'd like to join your protector in a cell?" The sheriff couldn't meet their eyes as he mounted up. They watched helplessly as Darren was tied to a horse and led away, his head bowed but his back straight with stubborn dignity. "You have 1 hour," Harlan informed them. "Then my men will remove anything remaining." He touched the brim of his hat with mocking courtesy and rode away, leaving 2 men to watch them. The sisters huddled together on the porch, snow beginning to drift down around them. "What do we do?" Lydia whispered, her voice shaking. Hannah straightened her shoulders, though her heart was breaking. "We pray, and we pack what we can carry." That evening found them in the old Miller barn, where kind neighbors had offered them shelter. They had managed to save some clothes, blankets, and Hannah's precious Bible, but little else. The barn was cold, despite the hay they'd piled for warmth, and the wind whistled through gaps in the wooden walls. In his jail cell, Darren sat on the hard bunk, every breath painful from his bruised ribs. The sheriff's heavy footsteps passed by again, pausing briefly. "I'm sorry, Darren, I truly am. But the railroad's claim is legal according to the papers filed. My hands are tied." Darren didn't respond, didn't even look up. The footsteps moved away, leaving him alone with his failure. He had promised to protect them, and instead they were homeless again, sheltering in a barn while he sat useless behind bars. Night fell early, as it always did in winter. In the barn, Hannah gathered her sisters close, their breath visible in the lantern light. "Let us pray," she said softly, taking their hands. Chloe's fingers were cold but strong in hers. "Pray for what? That God will suddenly make things right? That he'll stop men from being cruel and greedy?" "Yes," Hannah answered simply. "That and more. Remember the night we found Darren in the river?" Lydia nodded. "He was nearly dead from the cold. We didn't think he'd survive?" "But he did." Hannah's voice grew stronger. "God gave us strength to pull him from those icy waters, gave us wisdom to warm him slowly, tend his frostbite, gave him the will to fight back from death's door." She closed her eyes, her prayer rising fierce and clear in the darkness. "Lord, let him rise again. As you delivered him from the frozen river, deliver him now from injustice. Give us all strength to endure this trial, and show us your path through this wilderness." Chloe's grip tightened on her hand, anger giving way to determination. "We won't let them win," she whispered. "Not the railroad, not anyone. We're family now, all of us, and family fights for each other." Outside, snow continued to fall, blanketing the town in white silence. But in that cold barn, 3 sisters held fast to their faith and to each other, their prayers rising like smoke into the winter night. And in his cell, though he couldn't hear them, Darren felt something stir in his heart, a warmth that pushed back against despair, a reminder that he was no longer alone in his battles. The night deepened, bringing with it the darkest hour any of them had faced. But dawn would come again, and with it, perhaps, the light of hope and justice they so desperately sought. Gray light crept through the barn's weathered boards, bringing little warmth to the cold winter morning. Hannah stirred beneath the pile of blankets, her breath visible in the frigid air. Beside her, Lydia and Chloe huddled close, seeking warmth in their shared misery. The barn's owner, Mr. Miller, had been kind enough to let them shelter here, but it was a far cry from even Darren's humble shack. Hay scratched through their dresses, and the wind found every gap in the wooden walls. Still, they were grateful for any refuge. "We should get up," Hannah whispered, though every bone in her body protested the thought of leaving their nest of blankets. "There's work to be done." Chloe sat up, straw stuck in her dark hair. "I'm going to the sheriff's office. They can't keep Darren locked up forever." "Careful, sister," Lydia cautioned, brushing hay from her skirts as she rose. "We must not give them reason to jail us as well." A knock at the barn door interrupted them. Martha Wilson, one of their neighbors, stood there looking worried. "Lydia, could you come? My Tommy's fever's gotten worse, and Dr. Matthews is 3 days' ride away." Lydia grabbed her herb pouch without hesitation. "Of course, Hannah, I'll return when I can." The sisters watched Lydia hurry away with Martha, their hearts warmed by how naturally she stepped into service even in their own trouble. Her gift for healing had already begun drawing grateful neighbors to their cause. Chloe squared her shoulders. "I'm still going to see the sheriff. Someone has to speak up." Hannah nodded, knowing better than to argue with her youngest sister's determination. "Go with God's wisdom, Chloe. I'll visit some of the townspeople, see if any will help us prove the railroad's deception." They parted ways, each to their task. The morning air bit through their plain dresses, but they held their heads high as they walked into town. Let the people stare. They would not be driven away by shame or cold. In his cell, Darren sat on the hard wooden bunk, his bruised body aching with each movement. The morning light through the barred window cast shadows that reminded him of other failures. The partner he couldn't save from a grizzly. The family he'd left behind in Missouri, the promises broken by time and weakness. "Visitors aren't allowed," he heard the deputy say outside, followed by Chloe's fierce response. "Then I'll stand right here and shout until someone listens. You've got an innocent man in there, and everybody knows it." Despite his dark mood, Darren couldn't help but smile at her fire. That girl had more fight in her than most men he'd known. "Miss Yoder," the sheriff's tired voice joined in. "Please don't make this harder than it needs to be." "Harder? Like beating a man for protecting 3 women from theft? That kind of harder, Sheriff?" The law? Chloe's voice rose higher. "Since when does the law protect thieves with fancy papers over honest folk? My father taught us that true law comes from God's justice, not men's greed." "That's enough," the sheriff's patience clearly frayed. "One more word and you'll join him in there. Now go on. Get out of here." Darren heard Chloe's frustrated cry, then her boots stomping away on the wooden walkway. He closed his eyes, touched by her loyalty, but grateful the sheriff hadn't carried through on his threat. The day wore on, sun climbing higher but providing little warmth. In Martha Wilson's modest home, Lydia tended to young Tommy, her gentle hands preparing a poultice of herbs. "The fever's very high," she murmured, laying the compress on the boy's forehead. "Keep this fresh, and give him this tea every 2 hours." She handed Martha a small packet of dried leaves. "It will help break the fever." "Thank you," Martha whispered, tears in her eyes. "We couldn't pay a doctor even if one was here. I don't know how to repay you." Lydia squeezed the worried mother's hand. "God provides through each other, that's payment enough." Word of Lydia's kindness spread through the town like ripples in a pond. By afternoon, 3 more families had sought her help for various ailments. Each time, she gave freely of her knowledge and herbs, asking nothing in return but prayers for justice. At the saloon, Victor Harlan held court among his cronies, whiskey flowing freely as he boasted of his victory. "Prime land, gentlemen. Once the railroad puts that spur through, values will triple." Those simple folk never knew what they were sitting on. But not everyone shared his satisfaction. In corners and doorways, townsfolk whispered their doubts. "Awful quick how those papers went through. Never known the Yoders to miss a payment before their pa passed. That mountain man, McGraw, he's rough, sure, but he ain't never been dishonest." The murmurs reached the preacher's ears as he made his daily rounds. Elias Ward was not a young man, but his steps were purposeful as he approached the jail. The deputy didn't dare turn away a man of God. Soon, Preacher Ward stood before Darren's cell, his kind eyes taking in the prisoner's bruised face and slumped shoulders. "The Lord works in mysterious ways, Brother McGraw." Darren didn't look up. "Ain't feeling particularly blessed at the moment, preacher." "No?" Ward settled onto a wooden chair. "A man who lived alone hunting in the mountains suddenly finds himself with a family to love and protect. Seems like a blessing to me. Fat lot of good I did them. They're sleeping in a barn while I sit useless in here." "Useless?" The preacher's voice sharpened. "Those sisters are out there right now, fighting for justice in their own ways. Lydia healing the sick, Chloe challenging authority, Hannah building support among neighbors. The town's talking, Darren. Questions are being asked about those railroad papers." Darren finally raised his head. What good is talk against men with money and guns? Truth has power beyond gold or steel. Remember David against Goliath? The Lord's work isn't finished here. Ward leaned forward. "You've been given a second chance, son. Those women pulled you from death's icy grip. Now it's your turn to help pull justice from corruption's grasp." Before Darren could respond, singing drifted through the jail's window. Clear and pure, 3 feminine voices raised in harmony. Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. Darren's throat tightened as he recognized the hymn, the same one they'd sung that night by the river, working to warm his frozen body. The same one they'd shared in church, touching hearts with its simple beauty. "I once was lost, but now am found. I was blind, but now I see." Tears filled his eyes, unexpected and unstoppable. The sisters were out there in the cold, letting him know he wasn't forgotten. Their faith reached through iron bars and stone walls, warming something inside him he'd thought long dead. The preacher smiled gently. "Hear that, brother? That's the sound of hope. The Lord ain't done with any of you yet. As darkness fell, the singing faded away, but its echo remained in Darren's heart. He stood at the window, watching snow begin to fall again. But this time, the white flakes didn't bring despair. Instead, they reminded him of grace that had saved him once in an icy river, and grace that might yet save them all. In the barn, the sisters huddled close again, their voices worn from singing, but their spirits stronger for it. "Did you see?" Chloe whispered. Even the deputy was crying a little. "Hush now," Hannah said softly. "Let's pray for strength for tomorrow's battles." Their quiet prayers rose into the night, joining the softly falling snow. Hope, like a tiny flame, flickered against the darkness, small perhaps, but growing stronger with each passing hour. 2 days passed like molasses in winter. The town of Cedar Creek lay quiet under leaden skies, its streets muddy from melting snow. At the livery stable, horses stamped and snorted in the cold morning air. The clock in the church tower struck 9 when a stranger rode in from the east. He sat tall in the saddle, his black coat dusted with snow, a leather satchel secured behind him. Samuel Greyfeather's dark eyes took in the town with careful observation, noting the railroad construction at the edge of town, the closed bank, and the small crowd gathered near the jail. His Cherokee heritage showed in his high cheekbones and straight black hair, though he wore his clothes in the white man's style, a well-cut suit beneath his coat, and polished boots that spoke of courtroom floors rather than prairie trails. Heads turned as he dismounted outside the sheriff's office. Some folks had never seen a Cherokee lawyer before, and the sight stirred both curiosity and discomfort. Samuel paid them no mind, his bearing dignified and purposeful as he removed his satchel from the saddle. Inside his cell, Darren McGraw heard the commotion and moved to the barred window. His bruised face broke into a smile of recognition. "Well, I'll be damned," he whispered. "Samuel Greyfeather." The memory rose fresh in his mind. 4 years ago, deep in Montana territory, he'd come across 3 settlers beating a Cherokee man, their hatred fueled by whiskey and ignorance. Darren had driven them off with his rifle, then tended the man's wounds. That man had been Samuel, traveling west to investigate treaty violations. They'd shared a campfire for 3 nights, forming a friendship based on mutual respect and honor. Samuel stepped into the sheriff's office, snow melting from his boots. Sheriff Callahan looked up from his desk, surprise flickering across his weathered face. "Can I help you, mister?" Samuel Greyfeather, counselor at law. His voice was deep and measured, each word precise. "I've come concerning the Yoder sisters case and the unlawful detention of Darren McGraw." The sheriff's face tightened. "That's already settled business." The railroad dash. "Has committed fraud." Samuel opened his satchel, laying out several documents. "These are the original land grant papers for the Yoder homestead. And these," he produced more papers, "are examples of Victor Harlan's previous forgeries in 3 other territories." Callahan's face paled. "How did you—" "I've been tracking Mr. Harlan's activities for some time. The pattern is always the same. Fake foreclosures, forged documents, pressure on local banks." Samuel's dark eyes held the sheriff's gaze. "The question is, will you uphold the law or bend to railroad gold?" Word spread through town like wildfire. Within an hour, townsfolk began gathering outside the sheriff's office, storekeepers, ranchers, farmers. Among them stood Hannah, Lydia, and Chloe, their plain dresses standing out in the crowd. Inside, Samuel methodically laid out his case. The banker, summoned from his home, sat trembling in a chair as Samuel revealed irregularities in the foreclosure dates, discrepancies in signatures, proof that payments had been properly made but lost. "Mr. Jenkins," Samuel addressed the banker directly, "would you care to explain why the foreclosure papers bear a date when the bank was closed for a blizzard?" The banker's resolve cracked. "Harlan, he said the railroad would ruin me if I didn't cooperate. Said nobody would care about some Amish girls losing their farm." From his cell, Darren listened intently, pride in his old friend mixing with hope for the sisters. He could hear the crowd growing outside, their murmurs becoming a tide of anger as the truth emerged. Samuel turned to Sheriff Callahan. The evidence is clear. Will you continue to jail an innocent man while protecting criminals? The sheriff stood slowly, shame and relief warring on his face. "Deputy," he called, "bring the keys." McGraw's being released. When Darren emerged from his cell, the crowd outside had swelled to fill the street. He saw Hannah first, her face shining with joy and tears. Before he could reach her, Samuel stepped forward, extending his hand. "Brother," the Cherokee lawyer said simply, "a debt repaid." Darren gripped his hand hard. "Much obliged, Samuel, though I reckon God sent you more for their sake than mine." He nodded toward the sisters. "Perhaps for all our sakes," Samuel turned to address the crowd. "Justice isn't just words on paper. It lives in the hearts of those who stand against wrongdoing. This town faced a choice between railroad gold and simple truth. The choice isn't over." As if summoned by his words, Victor Harlan appeared at the edge of the crowd, his face dark with rage. "This changes nothing. The railroad will." "Will what?" Samuel's voice cut through the air like a knife. "Face federal investigation for land fraud? Stand trial for document forgery? Or perhaps you'd prefer to explain to your employers how you've implicated them in criminal conspiracy?" The railroad agent's face went from red to white. Behind him, several townsfolk moved to block his escape route. The sheriff stepped forward, resolve finally strengthening his spine. "Mr. Harlan, I believe you should come inside. We have some matters to discuss." In the barn that evening, the sisters huddled together on their makeshift beds, emotions too strong for sleep. The day's events seemed almost miraculous. Darren freed, their land rights defended, the railroad scheme exposed. "God sent us a warrior after all," Chloe said softly. "Just not the kind we expected." Hannah nodded, remembering Samuel's quiet strength as he dismantled the railroad's case. "He fights with truth instead of guns. Perhaps that's what we needed most." "Both kinds of courage matter," Lydia added, thinking of Darren's steadfast protection. "God uses different tools for different tasks." Outside their barn, snow began falling again, but its quiet descent felt peaceful now rather than threatening. The cold couldn't touch the warmth of hope that had been rekindled in their hearts. In his cell, now occupied by Victor Harlan, Darren stood at the window watching that same snowfall. He could hear the agent's angry muttering, but it meant nothing compared to the sound of truth finally spoken aloud. His whispered words fogged the cold glass. "Thank you, Lord, for sending help when we needed it most. Thank you for Samuel's friendship and these sisters' faith." The snow continued falling, each flake adding to the clean white blanket that covered Cedar Creek. It covered the muddy streets and the railroad's unfinished tracks, the jail and the barn, the places where injustice had walked and where truth had finally found its voice. Tomorrow would bring more challenges, but for tonight, hope was enough. Through the darkening evening, townspeople could be seen visiting the barn, bringing blankets, food, and apologies for their earlier silence. The sisters welcomed each one with grace, sharing what little they had, their forgiveness as pure as the falling snow. Samuel Greyfeather sat in the sheriff's office late into the night, carefully documenting everything. His careful hand recorded testimony and evidence, building a wall of truth that would protect not just the Yoder sisters, but others who might face similar schemes. Every now and then he would pause in his writing, listening to the quiet of the snow-muffled town, and allow himself a small smile of satisfaction. The truth, once spoken, had begun to heal more than just one family's wounds. It was healing a whole community's conscience, bringing them together against injustice. Through the crystalline night air, if one listened carefully, old debts and new hopes mingled like stars in the winter sky, promising a dawn of restoration. Morning sunlight sparkled on fresh snow as Samuel Greyfeather led Darren from his cell. The sheriff held the jailhouse door, unable to meet Darren's eyes. Outside, the sisters waited, their breath visible in the crisp air. "Darren," Chloe cried out first, rushing forward. Hannah and Lydia followed, their plain dresses swishing through the snow. They embraced him all at once, their tears freezing on his coat. Darren's arms encircled them awkwardly, his weathered face softening with emotion. Now, he mumbled, his voice rough. "You'll freeze out here fussing over me." Hannah stepped back, wiping her eyes. "We never lost faith," she said softly. "God sent Samuel just when we needed him most." The Cherokee lawyer stood quietly nearby, his dark eyes warm with satisfaction. "The hearing starts in 1 hour," he reminded them. "Best we get ready." The town hall filled quickly. Farmers, shopkeepers, and ranchers packed the wooden benches, their winter coats steaming in the heated room. The sisters sat with Darren in the front row, Samuel standing beside them with his documents arranged precisely on the table. Sheriff Callahan called the hearing to order, his voice stronger than it had been in days. The banker, Jenkins, sat slumped in the witness chair, his hands trembling. "Tell us about the foreclosure papers, Mr. Jenkins," Samuel prompted gently. The banker's confession spilled out like water from a broken dam. "Harlan came to me 3 months ago, said the railroad needed the Yoder land for their new spur line. When I told him the sisters were making their payments proper, Jenkins swallowed hard. He threatened to have the railroad pull all their business, said they'd ruin me, so I signed the false papers he brought." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. The sheriff's face darkened with each revelation of corruption. "And the missing payments?" and Samuel pressed. "Harlan took them, said he'd make them disappear. I knew it was wrong, but I was afraid." The sheriff stood, his voice carrying clear authority for the first time in months. "Based on this testimony and the evidence presented by Mr. Greyfeather, I hereby declare the foreclosure null and void. The Yoder sisters' claim to their father's land stands valid and untouched." Cheers erupted through the hall. Someone started clapping, and soon the whole room thundered with applause. Through the window, observers saw Victor Harlan mounting his horse, spurring it hard toward the railway station, leaving his hired men to face the town's justice alone. Hannah gripped Darren's hand tight, her eyes shining. "Thank you," she whispered, "for standing with us through all of this." That evening, as purple dusk settled over the snow-covered valley, wagons began arriving at Darren's shack. Neighbors piled out, carrying tools, lumber, and baskets of food. Mrs. Abernathy, the stern widow who had once warned the sisters against Darren, now led the effort to organize a proper supper. "Can't have you living in this drafty place," declared old Mr. Peterson, already measuring boards for repairs. "We'll fix it up proper, then help you get back to your father's farm come spring." The small shack filled with warmth and voices. Women worked in the kitchen while men discussed building plans. Children darted between adults, carrying plates and messages. The sisters moved through it all with grace, their plain dresses somehow right at home among their English neighbors. Lydia set up a long table made of planks and sawhorses, covering it with clean cloths. Soon it groaned under the weight of stew pots, bread loaves, and pies. The preacher offered a blessing, his words drawing amens from Amish and English alike. As people settled to eat, Hannah found Darren standing quietly by the fireplace. The flames cast flickering light across his face, softening the hard lines earned through years alone in the mountains. "God has restored more than just our land today," she said softly, taking his rough hand in hers. "He's given us a family we never expected." Darren looked down at their joined hands, then across the crowded room where Chloe was teaching children a clapping game, and Lydia was serving stew to tired workers. Samuel sat in the corner, sharing quiet words with the sheriff, building bridges between justice and mercy. "Reckon I'm learning that family comes in all kinds of ways," Darren replied, his voice thick with emotion. "Not just blood, but choice too." Hannah smiled, understanding that they stood together now not as rescuer and rescued, but as partners in whatever lay ahead. Around them, the shack buzzed with conversation and laughter, the simple meal becoming a feast of celebration and gratitude. The first rays of dawn painted the snow-covered valley in gold, as wagons began arriving at the Yoder homestead. The creak of wheels and stomping of horses filled the crisp morning air. Neighbors had rallied from miles around, bringing lumber, tools, and willing hands for the barn raising. "Quite a sight," Darren murmured, standing beside Hannah as they watched the procession. The church bell rang out clear and bright across the valley, its joyful peals drawing even more helpers from town. Men unloaded rough-cut beams and planks while women set up tables for the feast to come. The preacher stood with Samuel Greyfeather, both men rolling up their sleeves to join the work. Even Sheriff Callahan had come, perhaps seeking redemption through service. "The Lord provides through community," Hannah said softly, her eyes bright with unshed tears. She squared her shoulders and moved toward the outdoor kitchen area, already organizing the day's meals with quiet authority. Women gathered around her, accepting tasks with ready nods. Darren joined the men, his strong shoulders useful for heavy lifting. Chloe darted between workers, carrying water and tools where needed. Her energy seemed boundless as she climbed scaffolding to help position beams, ignoring protests that such work wasn't suited for a young woman. By mid-morning, the barn's skeleton began taking shape against the winter sky. Lydia moved among the workers, offering cool water and treating minor scrapes with her healing touch. The sound of hammers rang out in rhythm, punctuated by shouts of encouragement and direction. During the midday meal, workers gathered around long tables laden with bread, stew, and pies. Chloe, flushed with exertion and mischief, approached Darren as he finished his bowl. "I reckon I can split more wood than you, mountain man," she declared, eyes twinkling. "Care to prove me wrong?" A hush fell over the nearest workers, followed by chuckles. Darren set down his empty bowl, trying to hide his smile. "Might not be proper, challenging your elder like that." "Proper?" Chloe scoffed. "Since when has proper put up a barn?" Laughter rippled through the crowd. Even Hannah smiled, shaking her head at her youngest sister's boldness. Soon, workers gathered around 2 chopping blocks, calling out good-natured wagers on the contest. Chloe proved surprisingly skilled with an axe, her strokes precise if not as powerful as Darren's. When she split her 10th log, cheers erupted from the women. Darren, on his 12th, paused to wipe his brow. "You've got competition, McGraw," someone shouted, causing more laughter. The contest ended in good spirits, with Darren ahead by only 3 logs. Chloe curtsied dramatically, accepting defeat with a grin that suggested she'd achieved her real goal, lifting everyone's spirits for the afternoon's work. As the sun began its descent, lanterns were lit around the rising barn. The structure stood nearly complete, a testament to what many hands could accomplish in one day. Workers gathered in small groups, sharing coffee and conversation as darkness crept across the valley. Someone started singing an old hymn and others joined in. English and Amish voices blended together, rising into the star-filled sky. Darren stood at the edge of the lamplight, watching Hannah move among the workers, thanking each one personally. The sight stirred something deep within him. Here, among these people, the crushing loneliness of his mountain years felt distant. He belonged here, not as the rough trapper who'd once stumbled half-frozen into town, but as part of something larger, a family, a community. When the last workers had gone home, promising to return tomorrow to finish the detail work, Darren remained standing in the new barn. Moonlight filtered through the roof boards, casting silver patterns on the fresh-cut wood. "Thank you," he whispered, surprising himself with the prayer. "Thank you for leading me here." His voice grew stronger. "Thank you for giving me a home." He heard soft footsteps and turned to find Hannah in the doorway, her face gentle in the moonlight. She didn't speak, but her presence confirmed what his heart already knew. He was no longer an outsider. He was home. The little church overflowed that Sunday morning, with townsfolk spilling onto the wooden steps outside. Sunlight streamed through frosted windows as the preacher stood before his congregation, his weathered Bible open in his hands. "Today we gather to give thanks," he began, his voice carrying to every corner. "We've witnessed how the Lord works in mysterious ways, bringing hope through unexpected vessels." The sisters sat in their plain dresses near the front, with Darren beside them in a freshly pressed shirt. His rough hand held Hannah's delicate one, their fingers intertwined without shame or hesitation. Some smiled at the sight, remembering how far they'd all come from those first suspicious days. When the sisters rose to sing their hymn, something magical happened. As their voices lifted in harmony, other voices joined in. Mrs. Abernathy's strong alto, the blacksmith's deep bass, even children's sweet sopranos. The hymn swelled, filling the church with joy. "God works through unlikely means," the preacher continued, gesturing to Darren and the sisters. "Through a mountain man's courage and 3 Amish women's faith, he has shown us the power of mercy." After the service, townspeople crowded around them. Men who once mocked now shook Darren's hand firmly. Women who had whispered now embraced the sisters warmly. The celebration spilled over to the newly raised barn that afternoon. Children played tag in the fresh snow, while women shared apple and cherry pies on makeshift tables. The air rang with laughter and conversation. "Well," Chloe said, watching the scene with bright eyes, "we've surely become a peculiar family." She grinned at Darren. A mountain man, 3 plain folk sisters, and half the town besides. No one disagreed. As the sun painted the snow gold, Darren and Hannah walked back to the shack together. The warm glow of the lamp inside beckoned them home, a beacon of peace in the gathering dusk. Winter settled deep over the Colorado hills, wrapping Darren's shack in a blanket of pristine white. Inside, warmth and purpose filled their days as the unlikely family found their rhythm together. The new barn stood proud against the steel-gray sky, its fresh-cut timber already weathering to a gentle silver. Inside, Darren's mule stamped contentedly beside the sisters' chickens, while stores of grain and dried herbs hung from the rafters. Each evening brought its own quiet joy. Lydia bent over her work table, mixing healing teas from stored plants, elderberry for Mrs. Thompson's cough, willow bark for the blacksmith's aching joints. The neighbors came often now, grateful for her gentle touch and knowing wisdom. "You've got a gift," Darren told her one evening, watching her careful measuring. "Reminds me of the Cherokee healers I knew in the mountains." In the pale winter sunlight, Darren took Chloe into the woods, teaching her the ways of survival he'd learned through hard years alone. Her quick mind grasped the lessons eagerly. "See here," he showed her, demonstrating how to set a rabbit snare. "Gentle with the wire now. Too tight and it'll snap. Too loose and the rabbit slips free." Like most things in life, Chloe quipped, her fingers nimble at the work, finding the right balance. Hannah's presence filled their home with grace. Her sure hands kept them fed and clothed, while her quiet strength gave them all foundation. Often, Darren found himself watching her as she worked, amazed at how naturally she'd taken charge of their makeshift household. One evening, as shadows lengthened across the wooden floor, Hannah and Darren sat close together, mending a broken chair. The firelight played across their faces as they worked, comfortable in shared silence. "I never thought I'd find safety again," Hannah said softly, her needle moving steady through the cloth she was patching. "After Father died, everything seemed lost." Darren's rough hand stilled on the chair leg he was fixing. "You gave me something back too," he said, voice rough with emotion. "Something I thought was gone forever. Family." Their eyes met in the warm light, and understanding passed between them, deep and true as the winter stars. Hannah's cheeks flushed pink, but she didn't look away. The love growing between them needed no grand declarations. It lived in these quiet moments built on shared work and daily grace. Later that night, after the sisters had gone to bed, Darren knelt alone by the dying fire. His whispered prayer rose like smoke to the rafters. "Lord," he said, voice barely audible, "give me strength to be worthy of them, of her, of this gift you've given me." Spring crept into the Colorado mountains with gentle persistence. Snow retreated beneath warm rains, and tender green shoots pushed through softening earth. The land awakened, as if nature itself celebrated the coming joy. The one-room church gleamed with fresh whitewash on the morning of Darren and Hannah's wedding. Wildflowers gathered by neighborhood children brightened every windowsill, their sweet fragrance mixing with spring air that drifted through open doors. Hannah stood radiant in her simple white dress, her prayer cap pristine against dark hair. Beside her, Darren had traded his buckskins for borrowed Sunday clothes, his usually wild beard now neatly trimmed. His weathered hands trembled slightly as he held Hannah's steady ones. Lydia and Chloe flanked their sister, joy illuminating their faces. Chloe couldn't resist leaning close to whisper, "Well, Darren McGraw, looks like you're finally turning respectable." Her eyes sparkled with mischief and love. Lydia dabbed at her eyes with a handkerchief, remembering their father and all the path that led them here. Samuel Greyfeather sat in a place of honor, his presence a reminder of how justice and loyalty had preserved their happiness. Preacher Ward's voice filled the small church with warmth as he spoke of God's providence. "From wilderness and loss," he proclaimed, "the Lord has built a family stronger than blood." The congregation's voices rose in song. The familiar hymn that had once echoed from 3 lonely sisters now swelled with the strength of community. Even Darren, who once knew only silence, joined the singing. After the ceremony, tables groaned with feast day dishes spread under the vast Colorado sky. Children darted between adults' legs, playing tag around the sturdy new barn that stood as testament to shared labor and love. As dusk approached, lanterns winked to life like earthbound stars. Darren and Hannah walked hand in hand across their land. Land now unquestionably theirs, protected by law and community. They paused atop a gentle rise, surveying the scene below. Warm light spilled from their home's windows, carrying the sound of laughter and song. Inside, Chloe's clear voice led another hymn, while Lydia's harmonies twined around it. Neighbors lingered, sharing stories and pie, children drowsing in parents' laps. Darren squeezed Hannah's hand, overcome. This man, who had once been the loneliest of mountain trappers, now stood surrounded by family, not one forged by birth, but built through mercy, sustained by faith, and proven in hardship's fire. In the end, redemption had found him not in solitude, but in the hearts and hands of those who chose to love him. Thank you for listening. Stories connect us in the most unexpected ways. If you felt that spark today, make sure you're subscribed. I share a new one daily, and the next might change your day.